other tech help here with me. Okay, I'm live. Hi, guys. Sorry about that. I had a technical moment. So let me know, yes or no, can you guys hear me okay? Because I have this microphone on here and it's on, and I just want to make sure that you can hear me and the sound quality is good. So, oh, hi, Leslie. Yay. My mom is here. Okay, mom says yes. Tanya's here. Leslie, you guys can hear me. Perfect. I know there's a little bit of a delay back and forth. So we are going to have a really nice big group today. Oh, how funny. I can see I have tennis balls in the background of the shot. I'm going to get it out of the shot. I'm back. Okay, so we're going to have a really nice big group. So I'm going to give a couple minutes for everybody to hop on and make sure they don't have the technical problems. Okay, wonderful. Hi, Angie. Hi, Carrie from Boise, Idaho. Okay, amazing. I don't think I've ever had someone from Boise on here before. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dini. And I'm doing something a little bit different because usually there are like one or maybe sometimes people have a group of friends over with them and I'm here by myself. But today I have a friend over here helping to share my wine as well. So I'll introduce her and you can say hi.
Hi, everybody. I'm Siobhan. Some of you know me, some of you don't.
So Siobhan's going to help me drink all of this delicious wine. And she'll also be great because she's not a wine person. And so when she has questions or she's like, Dini, I have no idea what you're talking about right now. You just threw out a super technical term or whatever. You guys can ask me when you don't understand something, but Siobhan's also going to help me keep me honest so that I'm staying with you. I'm staying with the people. So hopefully you guys have your wines chilled. Leslie says hi, by the way.
Hi, Leslie.
Hopefully your wines are chilled. If they're not chilled, fear not. Here's what you can do. These YouTube videos, you can actually pause them, even though it's live, you can pause it and take a moment to chill your wines, unless you don't mind it not chilled. I don't also mind if you stick an ice cube in it, whatever you need to do to get the job done. But the fastest way to chill a bottle of wine is to take some paper towels, wet the paper towels, wrap them around the bottles and stick it in your freezer. And then set a timer on your watch or whatever for like 10 minutes so you don't actually freeze your wine. And you remember to take it out of the freezer and have it ready to drink, but you'll be just fine. So don't worry about that if you did that. And then go ahead and pour your wines. Hopefully you guys saw, can we drink it yet? Okay, yeah, my mom's asking, can we drink it? Yes, Mom, you can drink your wine. As I said in the note, the first wine that we're going to do is actually the Chablis or the French Chardonnay. For those of you who got who ordered your wine later, as I did, we're drinking the Gilbert Pic Chablis. Some of you might have bought the Tremblay, which is the first one I listed, which then quickly sold out. So somebody bought a lot of it. And then the second wine we're going to drink is the California wine. It's the Estancia Chardonnay. So that's wine number 2. And the best way to keep them straight, ideally, you guys might have a grease pencil, and I'll show you guys what those look like. And that's a really great way to just easily write on your wine glasses, and then you can wipe it off with a paper towel afterwards. If you don't have one of those, and I didn't do this today, what I always do is I start with the first wine on my left, right? We read right, left to right, and I put the second wine on my right. So today I put the French Chardonnay in my glass on the left, and that's my left. So I'm going to move it over here so that you guys have it on your left. And that's the Chablis or your French Chardonnay from cooler weather. And then you have your California Chardonnay, which you're going to put on your right-hand side. And that way you're always going to keep them straight. And also if you forget at any point, you can type in and say like, Dini, which one am I supposed to put in which glass? And I told you to get 2 glasses because what we're doing today is something that's really, really cool. Even people who've been wine tasting for a long time don't necessarily get to do this, to be able to taste 2 wines that are so perfectly set up to be able to understand and taste and experience body in wine. So the best way to do that is to taste the wine side by side so that you have what's called like a comparison. You're going back and forth. Like for instance, do you ever taste a wine and somebody says like, oh, this wine has high acidity or it has high tannins? And you're like, I don't know. because I haven't had that many wines in order to have that huge index to know whether this is low or high. Does that ever happen to you guys? Write it in the chat, yes or no, if you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, totally fine. But a lot of times what we need is context. So if you really want to understand if something is low or high, you need to know, well, is it low or high relative to what? So that's what we're going to get to do today. We're going to do side by side. And I chose the same grape variety. We're doing Chardonnay. Okay, buen dia. Okay, I have some people speaking in Spanish. I don't understand it. I'm sorry. You understand Spanish, Siobhan? No, you can't be my translator. Leslie can. So the other thing about the side by side is I chose the same grape variety. So we're keeping something constant so that we can really zero in and taste the differences in the body of the wine. Meanwhile, all this time, as I'm talking, guys, be sipping your wine and tasting the wines and going back and forth, right? You can start to experience the wines for yourself so that when I take you through the formal tasting, which I'm going to start in a minute, you'll know what I'm talking about. So, and then the third thing is that I chose a white wine. Why did I choose a white wine? Well, I don't know. My mom and her friends are mad at me for that. You guys wish that I chose a red wine. And I think my mom has a red wine for you guys to drink later. But okay, good day or hi. Thank you, Leslie. The thing about a white wine is that it doesn't have tannins and it doesn't have a lot of the extra complexity that you have in a red wine that can be confusing and kind of confuse the issue of what we're really trying to taste for, which is body. So white wines are a lot more transparent and simple that way. So I think we're really going to be able to taste this different. Okay, wonderful. I'm glad you can understand it in English, and I'll try and understand what you write in Spanish. Thank you, Arte. So all of that, we have our 2 glasses per person. Hopefully you've opened your wines, and now we are ready to start tasting. So cheers, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me in this wine tasting. Cheers, Siobhan. And go ahead and sip your wine. Just sip it normally the way you would normally sip any wine. And the first thing I always like to think about is like, do I like that wine? Is it tasty? So go ahead, write in the chat. Let me know if you guys like the first wine, the French Chardonnay, the Chablis, or whatever the cooler weather Chardonnay is that you chose. And just take a minute to like kind of savor it and enjoy it. Next, I'm going to take you through and have you taste the wine taster's way, which is, you give the wine a swirl, you smell the wine, and we swirl it so that we can make all the esters, all the smelling compounds come alive in the wine. And then take a sip. Cheers, Erica. Thank you for joining. And when you take the wine in your mouth, what you're going to do for this specific tasting, because we're tasting body, is you kind of want to move the wine around your tongue. So you don't swish it the way you would mouthwash, because you don't really want the wine to go too much into your gums the way you would mouthwash, because it's just going to have like a kind of a weird drying effect in your gums. But you do want it to get all around your tongue and kind of coat your tongue so that you really get a feeling for the wine. And the word that we're exploring today is body in the wine. And body is really more than like a specific taste or flavor. It's a feeling in your mouth. It is, how heavy is the wine? How unlike water is it? That would be a fuller bodied wine. So one analogy I usually give to people is to think about milk. Think about if this wine were a milk product, and if you're vegan, you can have almond milk or whatever. And think about, would this be closer to like a skim milk or water, in which case it would be light bodied? Would it be more like a milk, maybe a full fat milk, a whole milk in its weight in your mouth? Or would this be more like heavy cream or maybe even a milkshake? That would mean it's more full bodied. So kind of holding that analogy in your mind, take another sip of the wine, coat it around your tongue, and see if you can just taste the weight of the wine. And remember, if you guys aren't able to say like, oh, this is more like the 2% milk or water, or it's more like a milkshake, that's okay, because we're going to have another wine for comparison, right? And that's going to be able to reveal a little bit more of it. So this might be a good time. By the way, I'm going to pause for a second, because for all of you, especially if you're in groups or whatever, or I tell people, one of the greatest things about having wine tastings remotely is that you can show up in your pajamas. I'm wearing my pajamas bottoms, my pajama pants. And so, but whatever you're doing, if you feel comfortable for it, take a picture and tag me on Instagram, in your Instagram story or on your Facebook or whatever it is, and tag Dini Vino Graham if you're on Instagram, or Dini Vino on Facebook, because that will help me spread the word to everybody, and you can let everybody know how much fun you're having doing a remote wine tasting. I'm going to type that here too, so you guys know. Dini Vino Graham on Instagram. So if you guys want to, take a second to do that. And then we'll go on to our second wine. And this is the Estancia. Oh, and I see you guys. So my mom has the Drouin Chablis, and you're surprised that you like it. Yay, win. You know, this is what I always tell people, is that whenever I suggest that people do a Chardonnay or a white wine tasting, so many times, but especially with Chardonnay got a bad rap 10 years ago. And everyone used to say like, oh, I don't like Chardonnay. And people would say that so often, or I don't like white wines. And then I go out and I find interesting ones, or in this case, my mom did, and you can find really good ones there. And every single time people always tell me like, oh, I really liked this. This was yummy. This was Chardonnay. And it just goes to show you that grape varieties, they can have a huge, huge variation to them, and they can taste in all different ways. So you never know when you're going to find a good one. So give it a try. The second one is probably more of a classic Chardonnay that we think of with Chardonnay. It's from California. So again, if you kind of roll that around your tongue, let yourself feel the weight of it. You're going to see whether or not you can taste a difference. Now is a good time to ask you guys, do you guys taste a difference? And are you able to feel in your mouth which one feels kind of that creamier, richer, heavier feeling that fills up your mouth, and which one feels a little bit lighter? I will say in general, Chardonnay as a grape variety, if you think of it in your head compared to like Pinot Grigio or Sauvignon Blanc, those grape varieties, in general, Chardonnay is meant to be, or it's said to be, a fuller bodied wine. And by the way, we'll talk a little bit about where the body comes from and also what that means. But if everyone's too shy to say, oh, you guys are divided, I love that. That's kind of cool too, because I do also have to say that that the cool thing about wine tasting is that there's the wine itself, and there's an objective quality to that. But then you introduce it to your mouth, and everybody's own body physiology and even your own saliva interacts with the wine to create a whole experience that is truly unique to you. So you might actually taste this in different ways. I will say that, like, technically speaking, just of the wine objectively, the French Chardonnay, the Chablis from the cooler weather region, should be lighter bodied. And the California Chardonnay from the warmer weather region should be fuller bodied. Now, there's always going to be variations in this. Different years can be warmer or cooler in a place. I happen to choose a place within California in Monterey where it is on the cooler side, definitely for California. So all these things are factors in it too. Here in Denver, you're all on board with the Estancia Chardonnay. Okay, amazing, Tanya. And I saw that you guys have the Tremblay Chablis and you liked that too. So I'm so, so glad. Okay, Erica, you're getting that. The Estancia feels heavier. Yes, that's exactly what I mean, is the Estancia has the fuller bodied, it feels a little bit heavier. I don't know, what was the experience like for you? Were you able to perceive that?
Definitely. But it was funny. They both felt a little creamy.
They both feel creamy.
Which is strange. I never imagined white wine would be creamy.
But
I
exactly.
always think like maybe reds because they seem heavier. But yeah, they both did feel creamy.
Amazing. So you can hear, I don't know if you can hear Siobhan very well, but she said that both wines felt creamy to her, which I think is an indication of just what we were talking about. The Chardonnay is a fuller bodied white wine. And we don't always think of white wine as being fuller bodied, but Chardonnay is an example that is. Let's see your friends. Okay, Carrie. Hi, this is Siobhan. Sorry, she was on earlier, but might have been before you hopped on. I know. Maybe if I'm going to have you talk, I will put it on you from now on. So that is one thing that you can taste. So you can taste body kind of, especially in the middle part of your tongue. The other thing is I told you I'll tell you where body comes from. Body comes from mainly the alcohol in the wine. So you guys heard me talking about cooler weather Chardonnay and warmer weather Chardonnay. So in a cooler weather, if you think about if you were growing tomatoes or apples or anything like that, that you guys may have seen produce when it comes in at the farmer's market, when you get it in the cooler weather and like cooler years and things like that, how does it taste versus when you get a really warmer, riper year? Anybody familiar with produce? Any here, Siobhan, do you have any ideas? Spotlight on Siobhan. Well, the chat takes a minute. So in case somebody's coming on with that, I'll tell you at least my experiences with produce is that when you have a cooler weather year, your tomatoes especially are just nowhere near as ripe. Yeah, exactly. They're sweeter in the warmer weather. So if you have a really hot year, or any of you that have spent time in like the Mediterranean countries and Italy and Greece and things like that, like the produce there is so sweet. Like the tomatoes in Italy are just like, mouth-wateringly sweet and sweet and sweet. So this does all come back to body. So when you have less sugar in the grapes versus more sugar in the grapes, do you know what happens to sugar in the grapes when you make wine? It turns into alcohol, right? The part that we love so much. So when you have a cooler weather wine, then the grapes are grown, they get less sugar in them, they're less sweet, and so there's less alcohol in the wine. When you have a warmer weather wine, John just won the tomato trivia contest. Okay, amazing. I'm glad somebody else knows tomatoes the way I do. The squirrels eat all our tomatoes, actually, before we get to eat them. But they like them better in the warmer years. And the warmer weather fruit, when it gets riper and sweeter and therefore more sugar in it, all that sugar gets converted to alcohol. So therefore, it is a higher alcohol content. So cooler weather, lower alcohol content, and warmer weather, higher alcohol content. And Siobhan just did something really smart, which was going to be one of the tips I give you. Look what she's doing. Does anybody know what she's doing right now? Siobhan, tell them what you're doing.
I'm looking at the alcohol content of these wines.
She's looking at the alcohol content. See, smart lady. Oh, okay. Here come my spammers to talk about grapes for the next 50 chat thread. Okay, so what did we find? This one says 11 to 14%.
No, it says 12.5. And this one says 13.5.
Perfect. So true to form, the French Chardonnay says 12.5% alcohol by volume, and the California Chardonnay says 13.5% alcohol. So it's just a 1% difference, you might think, but actually in the realm of wine, that's a big percentage difference, because really most of the wines we drink only range from like 12 to 14%. So that 1% is a big jump. Why is this important? Because I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit more about body and what you like more. Like, do you like the wine with lesser body, or do you like the wine with more body? And then you're going to go out and do some homework and do the same thing with red wines and figure it out. And then based on what you find you like, you're going to be able to go into a wine store, and without asking a soul, without knowing anything else, you're going to be able to go up to those bottles of wine, because by law, every bottle of wine in the US has to have its alcohol level printed on it. And you're going to be able to take a peek and be like, oh, I learned that I like Chardonnay or I like white wines and when they have lower body. So I'm going to look for the ones that are more like 12.5% alcohol. Isn't that a cool trick? I think it's super cool because I'm like, oh, this is the game to me. This is probably like what I love to spend all of my time trying to empower people to be able to do, is to be able to figure out, what do I like and how do I find more wines like that? How do I go out and when I'm in a wine store, be able to find more of the wines or break up the wine store and figure it out into what I'm more likely to like? I use this trick even now when I don't know, which I often don't know, many of the labels when I walk into the wine store and I'm trying to sort out between wines. I'll take a look at the alcohol. And when I see like 15, 16% alcohol in wines, especially in a white wine, I know I'm not going to like that wine. Your taste may be different for red versus white wine. So I do recommend you go out and do this taste test, maybe with a Syrah or a Pinot Noir. Cool. All right, good. I'm glad, Angie, you like it. Amazing. So, oh my gosh, we have so many more things. I'm going to pause too. Do you guys have any questions? I'm going to talk to you more about food pairings for the lighter bodied versus the fuller bodied. Oh, and we only have 8 minutes left because I am going to end right on time at 8:30. So we're going to talk about food pairings. You're going to go out and repeat this for the red wines. I know one other thing that I wanted to tell you that's cool. You guys asked a question? Oh, I missed your question. Nancy wants to know why ice wine is sweet in cooler climates. Oh, great question. Okay, wonderful. So Nancy was clearly paying attention. And I don't know. Yeah, anyway, so in cooler weather climates, we talked about how there's less sugar than in warmer weather climates. And usually in wine, they take all the sugar that's in the grapes and it gets fermented into alcohol. And that's when you have what's called a dry wine because all of the sugar gets converted into alcohol. Now, when it comes to sweet wines, that's not the case. What they do is the fermentation stops at some point before all of the sugar is transformed into alcohol. So you're left with some of the sugar left over, or what they call the residual sugar, and that's what makes the wine sweet. That's one of the ways of making a sweet wine. There are other ways too, like if you're making a port or something like that, you'll add in some spirits and things like that, which also stops the fermentation and leaves some of the sugar and keeps it nice and sweet. Now, Nancy also notices something interesting, which is, why is it that when I think about those sweet wines, I think about Germany, I think about places in France, I think about New Zealand, really cold places that they have some of those sweet wines. This is because it's all about balance. If you took we'll do a whole separate tasting on acidity, but I'm just going to mention the topic a little bit here. Acidity is also one of those things that changes from warm weather to cool weather. In cooler weather, you keep more of the acidity or the pucker, like the pucker you have in lemonade in a wine, versus in a warmer weather. And when you have a lot of sugar and syrupy kind of residual sugar in a wine, like an ice wine, you need that acidity to balance out the sweetness. Because if you didn't have that, it would taste a little bit more like maple syrup. And nobody really wants to drink a whole glass of maple syrup. They want to taste wine and they want to drink the wine and have that pleasant interplay of the acidity, keeping the wine fresh, and also the sweetness that's so delicious, especially in an ice wine. So I hope that makes sense. I hope I'm being clear. It's probably a longer answer than you wanted. Okay, so apples are falling from the trees here in Idaho and they ferment and the alcohol gets the deer and elk drunk. I'm sure they nibble responsibly or they'll if you do overindulge. Well, I wonder how that makes for the deer and the elk staying out of the roads. Hopefully more of them don't end up in car crashes and things like that because they're drunk off the apples. That's a really funny fact. Thanks, Carrie. I like to have these facts from the field. We should do a whole thing about that. So we talked about some of the differences that weather can have on a wine. And one of the cool things that I always like to point out to people is this is one of the reasons why I never write off a grape variety. I know some people say like, oh, I don't like Merlot, or I don't like Pinot Noir, or I don't like Chardonnay and all these things. But you can see how different they can taste depending on where they're from. So don't necessarily rule out any grape variety. On the opposite side of that, there are also similarities. So I wanted to point that out since we have this nice opportunity to have two Chardonnays side by side that when I do my exams and things like that, we do blind tastings where we're trying to identify the grape variety and we're trying to identify the region and things like that. And one of the things that if I was tasting these wines and I was going to identify them as Chardonnay, one of the first things I would see is the color of them. So you can see that the color, even though it's pale, it's more on the golden side. There aren't, and I'm just holding these to the side, by the way. I know my glass went out of view there. But the best thing when you're trying to look at the color is to tilt the wine away from you against a white surface. Because that way you're always going to have like a standard and objective standard to look at it against. And you can see that on this wine, it doesn't really have greenish tinges to it. It's more of a golden color to it. And then the other thing is that when I smell it, in both wines, I get a really nice kind of golden apple fruit to it. And apple is a very, very classic smell associated with Chardonnay, as is kind of like a honey flavor that I get in both of them. The other thing is that in the Estancia, I also smell some of the vanilla. That I think comes from the oak barrels that they use to age it in. And that's also another typical thing that you'll get with Chardonnay. Interestingly, the Chablis, depending on which one you have, but many Chablis don't see any oak aging. So they're just aged in like stainless steel vats and things like that because they really want to focus on the pure fruit flavor and they don't want to introduce other flavors to it. So you won't get that as much maybe in your Chablis, although depending on which one you guys have, you may. Ours, the Gilbert Peak, for those of you who have this one, doesn't see any oak. So that one is just such a pure example of tasting like what is Chardonnay. And the other thing you'll get is maybe a difference between in the cooler weather one, I get more of like a green apple. There's like a little bit more snap to it, maybe even some like limey tones to it. And then in the California one, it's a little bit more like the sun-ripened fruit, maybe even like baked apples or something like that. Maybe the the fermented apples that the elk and the deer are eating and getting drunk off of. And so that's one way I could tell also that this comes from cooler weather region and this comes from a warmer weather region. So these are some of the things that you guys can start to pay attention to figure out, do I like cooler weather wines? Do I like warmer weather wines better? Because that also is going to be a great guide for you when you go into the retail store and figure out what you want to buy. Okay, no other questions? Not tons of questions. Oh, I finally understand what the sommelier means when they ask me about heavier or lighter bodied. Yay, Erica, perfect, so well done. That's amazing. That's exactly what I want to empower you guys with, is that kind of language so that when somebody asks you the question, you're not like, body, what are you talking about, the body and wine? But you're kind of like, oh yeah, body, I totally know what you're saying. And you've got even a better idea of what it is you really like. So if there's one exercise or one thing I'm going to leave you with afterwards is to really think about, and you might like both of these, by the way, it's totally fine to like both of them or to like neither of them. You might find that you've still got to find your groove in all this, but if you have a preference one way or another, take note of it. Just going to talk about food pairings too. The heavier bodied the wine, I also try to think about heavier, richer foods that are going to stand up to it. For instance, if I had the heavier, fuller bodied Chardonnay, and then I had like, let's say a very light salad, it might overpower that. Versus if I go with a lighter body Chardonnay, you can think about matching that with your lighter fish dishes, maybe even some vegetables. Grilled vegetables, I might go for the fuller bodied wine. Versus if I was going to do like a citrus salad or something like that, I might do it with the lighter bodied wine. Okay, so this is another thing to think about as we think about lighter and fuller bodied. And I talked about the weather. Good. I think I told you guys about most of the things I wrote myself reminders to talk about. But if you have any other questions, I'll give you another minute. You can post your questions there. If not, I hope you have lots of delicious wine, maybe even some of the snacks that I suggested to sit and savor and go back to. I will also send you an email after this with some ways to save your wine and preserve it so that if you want to keep it for up to a week, sometimes even 10 days, you can work on ways to keep that fresh, or pour it out into ice cube trays. It's a really great way to have good cooking wine, especially if you're a white wine recipes that call for white wine. Each ice cube is about 1 ounce, which is just a perfect measurement for when you're cooking to be able to know how much you need. So I'm going to leave you guys with all of that. I do many of these live wine tastings. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you for joining. And I would love it if you guys share this with your friends and invite them to come and join you to the next one, whether they can join you in person or whether they're going to join from their own home. As you guys see, you guys can be chatting together and things like that from wherever you are. Sometimes we have people from all over the world joining there. So would love for you to share it with your friends. And I thank you so much for joining me. This is really, really an honor to be able to do these. I love doing them, and I loved that I had Siobhan here. So thank you, Siobhan.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, and cheers.